Hello, everyone. It's Yasha Tay, the Queen of Picture Content Podcast, and I am going to get started. For those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Yasha Pendergrass. I am the Queen of Picture Content Podcast, where my mission is to inspire my kings and queens by sharing pearls of wisdom, being transparent, and living on purpose. My vision is to empower people to love while letting go of the hurts and pains of yesterday so that we can be restored. We are in series The 12 Extraordinary Women of the Bible. We will be diving in talking about Sarah on today. For those of you who have missed the other episodes, we started with Eve. We started the year off with Eve. And so throughout the year, we will be covering one extraordinary woman of the Bible per month. So if you have not seen the series and episodes of Eve, I suggest that you rewind, go back, get that good information because it all kind of flows with each other. So on today, we're going to talk about Sarah. For those who grew up in the church and those who didn't grow up in the church, Sarah is the wife of Abraham. Abraham was the man, the prophet, the man of God who was chosen to be the father of all nations. And so that's significant because when we talk about and we learn about Sarah, Sarah was mentioned in the Bible, and all it really said was she was barren, that she could not have children. So when we think about the promise that God made to Abraham that he was going to be the father of all nations, how could he be the father of all nations when his dear Sarah was not even able to have a child? So when we think about, we look at Sarah, it says Hebrews 11, by faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age because she judged him faithful who had promised. That is a powerful statement made by Sarah. She judged him faithful who had made the promise, which she's talking about our Lord Jesus Christ. So that's Hebrews 11 and 11. So in this book, authored by John MacArthur, it talks about the 12 extraordinary women in the Bible. It says that Sarah was classified or identified, and people called her impatient. She was temperamental. She was cruel. She was jealous. She was unreasonable. She was a complainer, and she also nagged. And so it talks about how all of those characteristics of Sarah is the total opposite of what God would look like, or what one would perceive to be a graceful and a meek woman. Her characteristics did not line up. It said that her name was Sarah, meaning my princess. Her name was changed to Sarah when she was 90 years old, according to Genesis 17 and 15. Why is that significant? Because so many times I even know for myself that I feel like, oh, I'm 46, I'm 47, I'm too old, I gotta hurry up, life is growing short. But it just goes to show that Sarah was not even mentioned. Her name was changed in her 90s. So you have purpose, we have assignment. Age is something that helps us to identify timing here on earth, but the God that we serve, He doesn't operate, He does not follow the rules of time. It also talks about how she received favor because she was so beautiful, that a lot of things that Sarah would get, it was like people would see her beauty and they would automatically give her things and award her with things. But it's so ironic because when we talked about Eve, it said that no mention of Eve's beauty was mentioned because it's almost like God wanted us to realize the beauty of Eve, like who she was, the gem of who she was, her purpose of being the rib to Adam so that he could be fulfilled as what God had called him to. But the total opposite is with Sarah. It talks about Sarah's beauty. It talks about how the Bible don't even talk about Sarah until she's 65 years old. It talks about how Sarah's faith, how Sarah had faith. She definitely had faith. It talks about every record of her temperament. And it just kind of speaks to, even though she was angry and she was mad because she could not bear a child, she was always faithful to her husband. She was always that stoic woman that stood by her husband. And I know you're saying, oh, but she was the one who convinced her husband to lay with her maid and had a child. I get that. Yeah. But that's not the reason for this lesson today. We're talking about how, despite all, she stood and on the promises of God. She stood and she understood that even though she had concocted a immoral, unrighteous, foolish plan for her husband to lay with her maid, because she was thinking that she needed to do something to help fulfill God's promise. Come on, y'all. Listen to this. She did something because she felt like God needed help. Can you relate? I know I can relate. There's sometimes I feel like I need to rush along. God, I know you're here. I trust you, but I need to rush you along. But it shows that even though she convinced her husband to lay and he had a child, that still was not the seed. That still was not the promise that God made. God is saying he don't need our help. God doesn't need our help to do the thing that he needs to do. And so for me, that was just really, really, um, it just stood out. Her heart sometimes was led astray because she's barren. She can't have a child, but God has promised that her husband is going to be the father of all nations. So she's trying to figure out, I am his wife. There's a certain duty. I'm supposed to be there to support. I'm supposed to be there to do my part, but I can't because I can't even give him the very thing that God has promised. How can he be a father without a child? How can he be a father without a child? So then, she goes on and she thinks that she needs to help God. She needs to help him to make Abraham the father of all nations. And so it just talks about how it says, okay, hold on. Characteristics left him involved in the act of gross unfaithfulness. So it says that because he listened, because she felt like she needed to help God, she forced her and her husband into a situation to where she was found herself unfaithful for the promises that God had given her. But this is something that's really, really that stood out to me. It said that in the word, um, God pretty much said that Abraham, and the words of the nation came out of Abraham. Prophets would arise, okay? Through the scriptures that would be given to the world, God would dwell in the midst and in his sanctuary among them. But their lineage would deliver a Messiah which would raise from the dead and allow all nations to be saved. Okay, I know I chopped it up, but what it pretty much says is because of what God promised Abraham, that from Abraham obedience, that there was going to be prophets, there was going to be words that's going to come. And because those words are going to come, that through that lineage of Abraham being the father of all nations, that through that bloodline, a Messiah, a deliverer was going to be born. And so think about it. Sarah obviously had a role to play in Abraham's becoming the father of all nations. She was surely aware of God's promise that was made unto Abraham. So this is just series one. I want to take my time with this. Sarah, though angry through bitterness, through wanting to make sure that her husband got what God had promised, but understanding that her womb was barren, that she was not even able to have a child. But she knew what God had promised. And she felt like she needed to help God along. So I encourage you on today as we dive into Sarah. And even though she had these temperaments and she was upset and she was angry, she stood by her husband. She respected her role as his wife and she kept the faith because the word says that even though she was in old age, she trusts the one that had made the promise. I want to encourage you that you're in your Sarah situation, it may not be that you cannot have a child, but it may be feel like God has promised you something that needs to be birthed, and it seems like you can't even get pregnant in that thing. God doesn't need our help. He doesn't need our help. And because he promised Abraham to be the father of all nations, and she felt like, oh, well, I can't even have a child. God said, be still and know that I'm God. I don't need your help, daughter. I don't need your help, my brother. So this is part one of Sarah. And there's a fun fact that I'm going to put on next week's series. But just remember, when God has made a promise, he does not need our help. He just needs our faithfulness. He just needs us to be still and know that he is God. And so we're going to dive more into the process of Sarah in her barren state. And we're going to dig into the process of Abraham being the father of all nations with the wife who appeared to not be able to give him the one thing to make him a father, a seed. I love you. Until next time, see you soon.